Joining me now is Sonya Mays, President and CEO of Develop Detroit, a nonprofit developer specializing in affordable and mixed income housing. Is that right?
That's right.
Thank you so much for being here on Detroit Next.
Thanks for having me.
So we are talking about, the issues that are important for these mayoral and city council races this year. Development, affordable housing have continually come up in the conversations that we're having. Um, I don't know. Let's just start broadly. Is it tough to get stuff done in Detroit right now in the development world? What is you dealing with on kind of a daily basis as you do your projects?
Yeah, this is definitely the most challenging macro environment for the work that I do that I've seen since I've been in this work. So I have been in housing development. This will be Develop Detroit's 10-year anniversary in
Congrats.
June. So very excited about that. And so my entry into this space comes after the Great Recession, so I want to qualify my next few remarks with that. But over the last 10 years in Detroit, this is definitely shaping up to be the toughest stretch that I've seen. This is shaping up to be a more difficult environment for development than the pandemic period was. The first time around with the Trump administration, when we had to figure out how to absorb tariffs on key materials that are important in housing. And so you have the return of tariffs on things like aluminum, steel, and lumber. You also have the interest rates environment is much more unfavorable for financing projects than it was a few years ago. And then you start to kind of layer on the stuff that's happening at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And so you have the kind of the receding of the ARPA money, which had really been supporting a lot of the affordable housing work for the last few years. You have some changes at the state level with the kinds of things that they're focused on in terms of investment, plus also some shrinking of some resources that have been prevalent over the last few years. And then, of course, you have the challenge of an imminent leadership change
Mhm.
locally. So there's a lot that's going on right now that makes this pretty challenging.
Let's highlight the leadership change. I mean, how critical is it that we make the right choice in this? And what do you want to hear from the candidates who are running to be the next mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first answer is pretty easy. I mean,
Yeah.
I have long been a big proponent of making as much as you want to pay attention to the federal conversation and what's happening in DC is always important from a funding standpoint for affordable housing. And so I won't say that that doesn't matter, but as much as possible, I have always been interested in how do we get as effective and efficient at our local context as possible. And so who is in leadership positions always matters. And this is us coming up on a point where we're going to have a significant leadership change for the first time in 12 years. So I think that kind of goes without saying. What are some of the things that I'm looking for as the leader of a mission-based real estate development company? Um, I we are pretty growth focused. I have a fairly intimate understanding of this city's government and its history through bankruptcy and kind of where we are now.
Where's the need for affordable housing? It sounds like it's more in the middle. So how do we kind of define that middle income workforce housing?
I have to admit something. I'm not a great lover of the term affordable housing because
Yeah.
it's one of these things that
What does it mean?
doesn't really have a right. It doesn't have a precise definition, and it lends itself to a lot of personalized interpretation,
Yeah.
and so um, and there's a related term that I like even less, which you'll hear some people in housing talking about AMI or
Yeah.
area median income, and I
Every
like
time
that
we talk about
even
that, we have
less.
to break down what that means for
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
So I like that even less. And so what I actually do try to do, to your point, is I try to contextualize this for folks. And so my organization, Develop Detroit, we are predominantly a housing developer. What that means is we build and renovate housing, and that's mostly rental, though not exclusively. We do some home ownerships work as well. And for our rental, the part of our business that is rental focused, that is traditionally more of an apartment style community. And almost 80% of our units in Detroit that are available for rent are available to people who make about $36,000 or less.
Mhm.
That number changes slightly from year to year, and if you want to get into that, I'm happy to. But for the average person who's trying to kind of make sense of what does affordable housing mean in Detroit, it is a little bit of a term of art. What we do and what most people are doing in Detroit is they're focusing on folks who are making less than about $36,000
Where does that
a year
number
in
come
salary.
from?
That is a calculation driven by it's a percentage of you're gonna make me use that term that I hate
No,
using.
sorry.
It's a percentage of that area median income term,
Mhm.
and so it's calculated by taking a geographic area in where we live in Detroit. It includes Detroit, includes Livonia and a few other suburban cities.
Warren,
Warren,
yeah.
yeah. So you take that wider geographic area, you figure out what the median income
Yeah.
is, and then you back into layers of that. So 60% AMI is typically what my organization tries to focus at, and that ends up being $36,000 for Detroit, give or take. And so if you kind of think about what that is, our typical renter is someone who is making between, minimum wage in Michigan is something like 12.50. So we're making between 12.50 up to $18 an hour.
Mm.
And so if you kind of think about what those jobs are, you get service jobs in that range, lots of service jobs in that range, some entry level factory jobs, for a long time, there were, categories in the school system that might have kind of touched into that. No longer teachers, actually, probably never teachers, but like paraprofessionals, daycare workers. There, lots of folks at the hospital who fall into that, and so those are the kind of jobs to give people an idea
Yeah.
of who would fall into that. I also just want to quickly say for most of the work that we do, because I find that there's some converging of the idea of public housing and affordable housing for folks. And I think there's some people who even try to weaponize that convergence. For the most part, affordable housing, particularly what Develop Detroit does, is there is like we're working with people who have incomes or have a source of income. Yeah. So our properties in Detroit, we are not what folks think of when they think about public housing, which I think is generally understood to be um, uh, no to very, very, very low income. We are providing housing for folks who are, they're working folks. They're
Mhm.
getting up. They're going to a job. I just articulated some of those job types,
Public
and then
housing
just
is more government provided housing as well, right?
yeah, it's government. It's more deeply subsidized. So,
Mm.
classically, it's your
Like Section 8.
projects. Well, classically, like you might not be old enough to remember, but we used to have these project towers all over Detroit,
Yeah.
and so classically, that's what it is. And in a more modern sense, it's a Section 8 voucher.
Okay. How can the city be a better partner for developers like yourself who are trying to create, homes that fill that need? What could they be doing to either incentivize it, help you with the financing, help you get through red tape? I mean, what are the biggest challenges you're up against?
So I have three things on my personal and professional wish list. The first is that I really believe that collectively we can do more to get a better, more streamlined system for development. If you just go out and talk to 10 people who are doing development in Detroit, you're going to get stories of vastly different experiences and vastly different timelines. And I do think that we still have some real opportunity and crucial opportunity to think about how do we get this process streamlined, right? And so that would be one. The other two are a little, I would say, maybe a little wonky or a little loftier.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, the one of the things. So second on my list is being much more intentional about how we get unnecessary cost out of the building and developing of housing. And so there are probably innumerable costs that fall under that umbrella. But one of the things that we have been long interested at Develop Detroit is how do we build a truly affordable, so again, to someone who makes, in our homeownership definition is slightly higher income, so someone who makes about 45 to you call it 40 to $50,000 a year. How do we build a home or reliably renovate homes that are affordable to that population and do it in a scalable way? And cost continues to be a really big impediment in
Mhm.
that. And so, we are second on my list is trying to figure out how can we extract unnecessary costs from that, right? So can we talk about whether there's an unnecessary burden on the permitting side? Can we talk about whether there's an unnecessary burden within building code? Are there things that prevent us from really scaling modern construction technologies like panelized building? People have been exploring 3D homes, and how do we kind of take costs and really lean into the efficiencies of those so that we can be scalable.
Mhm.
The third thing that would be on my list is I call it lofty. It's also extremely practical and pragmatic, and that's property tax reform.
Mhm.
I we can spend a whole episode talking about the implications of Detroit's property tax burden. It is a real competitive disadvantage if you think about the state of Michigan and you accept our demographic numbers that we are probably as a state going to be growing at a flat level, so
Yeah.
not growing at all.
Right. If not
Yeah,
shrinking a
if
little
not
bit.
shrinking.
Yeah.
Then Detroit is in a competitive race for residents with Oakland County, with the rest of Wayne County, with Macomb County, and our property tax. We have a lot of unique, unreplicatable, unreplicable um, assets in Detroit. We have the riverfront,
Yep.
we have cultural communities and institutions, we have all the sports teams here. Um, and how do we rationalize property tax burden so that folks aren't having to feel like they are being financially penalized for owning a home in Detroit?
Right. That it feels like somewhat of a financial sacrifice to be in a city that you love because you have to pay more taxes, right?
It's not that it feels like, it
It
is.
literally
Yeah,
is.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
If you run the calculations, it is. And so, Mayor Duggan took a run at this with the version of reform,
Mhm.
the split tax proposal. But I would encourage the next mayor to be someone who is prepared to throw significant political capital at resolving that issue.
Do you feel like the candidates and, feel free to single somebody out or don't, have relationships in Lansing that could get that done? Because I think what you're talking about is a common problem that we have in the city where we need Lansing to get on board with things that we should change to help the city, but we don't always have the political influence or I don't know, there's a lot of reasons for that, I'm sure. But do you feel that the next leader, whoever that is out of the field, we have some solid people that can go up to Lansing and advocate?
Yeah, I don't think the answer to that is static, right? Because Lansing changes every 2 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's the term limits kind of make that more of a revolving door than I think would actually be helpful. And so I would probably focus the answer to that on who is going to be best at coalition building? Who is going to be best at understanding that this is not a solution that one party or the other can fix on its own? Who is going to be enough of a bridge builder where you can bring to because this there with the split tax proposal, there were some winners and there were some losers,
Right.
right? And you have to be the kind of person who could kind of like get in there, build coalitions, resolve some of those inherent conflicts, and push toward what is really an enormous body of work. And so that's the kind of leader that I would be that those are the qualities that I would be looking for on that particular issue.
Did you like the split tax rate proposal?
I probably would call myself neutral on it. Like,
Yeah.
I would probably call myself, it was better than what we have. But then I also, looking through the eyes of the average homeowner, I would say that it didn't quite drive the cost savings that I think would
Yeah.
change
I
behavior.
think the average savings would have been like $100 or something, which is nice, but that's like a trip to the grocery store instead of something more substantial. But I do think generally people want to find a way to make speculators pay more who have been sitting on land and not really doing anything with it. And finding a way to use taxes on them to offset a property tax on residents seems like a popular idea. So I'm kind of curious if that resurfaces in any way. What's your experience with like the speculator world as you've gone about trying to acquire properties? Has that been challenging to get have you had to negotiate with these folks? I mean, I hear a lot of frustration about how they're locked up land that could be developed in neighborhoods.
This is probably another place where I might be surprisingly more neutral than people would expect. We as an organization, we have bought property from people that would be classically described as speculators. Like, we've definitely bought property from people who have shown up on who it was an outlier that did the out it's some one of
Yeah.
our local
Yep.
publications did a sort of a multi-pronged
They've
expose
done a
on
really good
this.
job of yeah.
Yeah, and so you would definitely bought properties from people who showed up on that list, I don't know that I felt like it was an extractive experience, in part because one of the things that, some speculators do is they put together assemblages, and so, we have organizationally, we have a very specific example of, where someone was able to put together a bundle, that made our development work easier, and so I also, like, I just kinda get tripped up too on who is a speculator? Like, I know so many people in my family who bought the house next door because it allowed them to protect and control against disorder in their neighborhood. Certainly we have people I don't think we would call people who own side lots, next door. So I don't know, I'm probably
Yeah, I
just
don't think that's what they're talking about.
yeah, I am
People have the idea of like an out of town person or like even an out of state person who's buying up vast swaths of either vacant land or abandoned buildings and then basically just not doing anything with it until it's time to sell for a big profit. That's the kind of
yeah, I get it. I
archetype.
let me just and I'll make this final point on that. I try to be much more growth focused, and one of the things that I have seen in a very real policy way in Detroit is when you chase after like the system has to be looked at holistically all the time. And so when you get overly focused on one part of a real estate market, like you have a lot of different elements in a healthy functioning real estate market. And if you get overly focused on one element and try to give a lot of medicine to speculators, you can run into the risk of, you know, forcing good actors to take this medicine that makes it harder to get some of the good work that you do.
Mhm.
And so I am general I will never, ever, ever defend someone that is a slummy landlord that is nakedly extractive. You will never get any kind of thing that comes close to a defense for me out of that. But I do believe in a more nuanced approach where, you can't necessarily come at those folks in a way that makes it harder for others, to
Yeah.
do work. I think we've seen some examples of that.
I think that was, one concern about the split rate land value tax is that it would also penalize smaller developers that are really struggling to get their projects done.
And
So,
churches and
right, yeah,
other groups,
and
yeah.
like people that bought side lots would see some of their taxes go up under that. Anyway, not to get into that one too much. In a world where we have high costs to build and we are, not getting a whole lot of, we as the investor, I'm not investing, but people doing this work. Uh, I have a hard time making a lot of revenue on these projects given the incomes in the city. What do we do about you mentioned maybe some potential strategies there. I mean, there's a big gap in the financing that seems to make it really tough for people to want to invest in in any kind of development because of it's really expensive and they don't expect to make much money off of it. So what do we do about that?
Well, I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna seem like it's super easy. This is really hard
Yeah.
work. All the easy strategies have already been implemented in Detroit, so I'll say that. Uh, there One way of looking at Detroit is the way you initially framed it, which is there's a cost problem here. Everything costs too much. It costs more than what people can afford. And so let's focus on the cost side of things. You have to do that. One of my answers of what I would have someone focus on is definitely around like how do we extract and make things more operationally efficient from the standpoint. But the other way of looking at Detroit is Detroit has an income problem.
Mhm.
And I actually think this is the better way to look at Detroit is to look at it through an income deficiency lens. And we know Detroit has an income issue because that area median income that we talked about a little bit earlier, if you compare what is the city of Detroit's true median income versus what it is when you include communities like Livonia and Warren, there is a very large gap.
Yeah.
And so the solving the housing problem, there's a cost element to it, but I don't believe you can do that in a vacuum apart from dealing with the income issue, and that's why I'm a big proponent of focusing on middle class strategies. And again, very specifically, middle class strategies that are growth oriented, that are helping the overall city get bigger, but are also very thoughtfully aligned on how you move existing Detroiters to a place where they have reliably greater incomes. And that's really tough work, right? That's really, really tough work. And it's particularly difficult. I didn't mention this earlier in my sort of macro, what's going on in the macro environment context, but it's particularly challenging to think about how do you move incomes up in what is probably a once in a generation shift in how work happens in society. And with that, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence, AI, kind of the changes in mobility technology. And so we're probably at a cusp of just wholesale change in the way who performs what type of work. And so thinking about all of that through that lens is pretty challenging. But I have looked at this ad nauseum for 10 years, and I don't think we are going to get out of our housing problem by just trying to deal with the cost side of this.
Mhm. Yeah, we gotta raise people's incomes as well. To bring us full circle and to end off our conversation here, are you optimistic about the future of the city?
I am. I don't think you can be a Detroiter and not be optimistic about the future of Detroit. It's just like it's who we are. We're tough times are part of our lineage, if you will, and this is, I think the next couple of years are going to be kind of tough. But they're going to be tough for everybody. It's going to be tough across the country. And so I'm optimistic though because we always find a way in Detroit. Like we always figure it out. I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now to elect someone who is visionary, but also someone who is a good administrator of day to day government, and hopefully that person will be able to kind of lay out a new vision for Detroit that includes greater investment in middle class incomes, middle class housing, middle class job opportunities, while continuing our pretty solid trajectory of getting the city, looking better, feeling better, operating better.
So, for folks that are interested in getting into development and maybe making an impact on like their immediate neighborhood, I often hear that it's they don't have access to the same kinds of tools as the larger developments in the city. They don't have access to like transformational brownfield funding and some of these other abatements. What are some of the challenges that they run into? What kind of help is available for the smaller developers in the city?
It's When you mention smaller developers, that's one of the things that I really love about real estate. Real estate, notwithstanding, notwithstanding it requiring capital to do larger projects actually ends up being one of the more egalitarian avenues that people still have to do wealth building. Like you can come into a community like Detroit and you can buy a duplex and you can start small. If you're handy, you can do your renovation yourself and you can build a portfolio. And I know a lot of people who have done that successfully, not just in Detroit and other places. And so I think that's one of the cool things about the space for someone who finds themselves either starting out or curious about being a developer. The first thing I tell them is to get connected with one of the handful of support organizations that currently exist for the purpose of giving people the tools that they need to be successful. So I've been very involved with a handful of other developers in an organization called READ,
Mhm.
which supports Black developers of all sizes doing this work in Detroit. There's Building Community Values, which was founded by Chase Cantrell, who does a lot of work training.
Chase is on this very episode.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. Old friend of mine. And so I think the the opportunity for sure is there. But let's talk about some of the challenges. This is a really good example of the point that I was making earlier of how sometimes we have unforced policy errors because maybe the entire ecosystem isn't being equally valued as people kind of think through what problems they're trying to solve. And so a few years ago, Detroit policymakers created I'm going to blotch the name of it, but it was basically like a rental ordinance where if you were renting a property out, you needed to get your property um, um,
Certificate
sp-
of compliance,
yeah,
right?
you had to get it
Yeah.
inspected, and there were all of these things that had to be done to it, and it ended up being costly, in particular, very costly for the mom and pop developers. And Detroit Future City has done some really great work on this, where they have taken the time to analyze what does the rental market what does it actually look like in Detroit, who owns what. And their analysis has shown that almost 70%, maybe even a little over 70%, but about 70% of rental properties are owned by people who only have one, two, or three units.
Mhm.
And so a lot of us know those folks, like they own a duplex, right? Or they inherited grandma's house and they're renting it out. And so those are not people. If you have one or two units, you're not you don't have an ATM outside, right? Like you're not making
Yeah.
tens of thousands of dollars a month in Detroit. You're not. And so that rental ordinance was very well intentioned because what it said is we don't think people rightfully said we don't think people should be living in conditions that are not up to code. And so we're going to force people to deal with that. But the standards were so onerous and costly that the vast majority of rental owners just didn't bother,
Mhm.
right? And so then they're getting penalized. And so eventually the city came back and amended that and brought it, better into
Yeah, they
better balance.
streamlined it basically
Yeah.
within, I think, the last year even. And because of what you're saying, they
Mhm.
found that this enforcement mechanism didn't work. It didn't cause more rental properties to become compliant. It might have actually done the opposite.
I think it actually made the problem worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can credibly articulate that it made the problem worse. And so again, well-intentioned, good goal, but for me, it's an example of one of those ways where we are trying to feed medicine to a group of very bad actors, but everybody has to take the same medicine. And so
Mm.
you end up harming a lot of folks that you really need in a functioning real estate market. And so hopefully the changes to that will be better. But I think those are some of the challenges that you face as a small owner is the red tape, the bureaucracy, the how do I stay in line with all of the somewhat constantly changing guidelines and
Mhm.
standards. And then depending on where you're renting, you may also have some challenges with tenant behavior, which is I think another place where we probably don't spend enough time talking about that in Detroit.
So, anyways, thank you so much for being on the show with us. Really appreciate you being candid and giving us so much great information.
Appreciate it. It was good times.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.